Hello, welcome to the Art Through Creation Lens. And this will be presented by Youmee Lee. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Tony Nitko, and I have silver grayish hair. I am wearing a green plaid shirt. My background is really a mess. Sorry about that. We're in the process of moving. We just recently moved into this house, so haven't had a lot of time to unpack. Behind me, there is a painting that I've been working on and have yet to finish. Maybe after this Deaf Visual Art Festival, that'll inspire me to continue painting. Okay. So my background, I have boxes, pillows, a dog bed, various shelving. So excuse me. So this is presented partially for the Deaf Visual Art Festival, one of the 8 activities that we will be providing through Zoom. So please do visit our website for further workshops that you can have the opportunity to sign up for. Our previous workshops were awesome. And we're very excited about today's presenter and as well as our future workshops. There's a lot of sponsorship behind this festival, and some that need to be recognized are as such. First off, we have Deaf Inc., of course. Wow. There's been a lot of staff hours putting this program together, as well as Missouri Art that has been putting this together as well. RIT, NID, National Institute for Technology, and National Association for the Deaf has put this together. Sorensen, Communication Through the Deaf. Oh, let's see. NTID. The National Art Museum of St. Louis. Nipper Museum. Washington University. Whew, there's just too many to count. Maybe I forgot a few. But really, this has inspired so many organizations to get involved to make this event happen. So there are some ground rules that I would like to cover. The chat is here for everyone. Please feel free to provide feedback, ideas, but if you have a direct question, please write it down and save it for the question and answer session. We're going to keep the chat open for general feedback, but the Q&A will be saved for the end. This way, there's no interruptions while Youmee Lee presents. She can finish her whole presentation and then she'll take time to answer any questions y'all may have. This is recorded, and we hope that once this is done, then we can edit it and update it for future viewing purposes. So I have been the director of the visual arts for, I think I'm going on my 5th year for this festival, and I am always looking for new talent, new artists, emerging artists. This woman, wow, studying her work, she has great talent that has started within the last few years, and she just continues to grow and flourish. So Youmee Lee She is Korean. She is a deaf American woman, an artist. She has dabbled in various mediums, worked with the MFA in film. She's studied visual arts in New York City, and she's gone to Amsterdam as well as Seoul. She is getting her MFA in film and animation, where she is now working on her thesis. So we are very excited to hear more from her and see what more flourishes from her future. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Youmee Lee. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. I'm very happy to be presenting today. And the slides will populate soon.
I have dark black hair. I'm wearing a green shirt. My background is beige. My presentation is called Art Through an Intersectional Lens, from my travels through my life until now, and how my Asian culture has influenced my work and me as a person, how my cultural family has influenced me. This is a picture of me at the age of 3. I'm wearing a denim outfit with a red shirt underneath. My mom is standing off to the side, but you can't see much of her in the picture. And then I'm not sure what else you noticed in there. There was a book on the table, and I was born in Korea. And when I was little, they found out that I was deaf. From the family of 4, my mom can hear, my dad is hard of hearing. I have a brother that can hear, and then me. And so they tried to figure out what they needed to do with me. They knew it was important to communicate with me as a young child. And so they all decided to learn sign language. So that's the American Sign Language, ABC Sign Language book on the table. They didn't have videos and everything like they do nowadays. Back then, we had to try to figure out how to learn ASL. And so they used these books, which had pictures and would help us learn how to sign everything. I had a teacher for the deaf that would come to my house and teach my entire family sign language. So it was face-to-face in my home. And so that's what that started out. And that's how I became who I am. Moving to America was really tough for me in the beginning. It was very difficult, having no family, no relatives in the area. My parents struggled. When they came to the United States, we were called immigrants. Next slide. And so as an immigrant, that's what we were labeled as without being born here. I struggled with that because I grew up here. I've been here for over 30 years. But in the beginning, when my family first got here, they often labeled us fresh off the boat or phobies. And that's not a really positive term at all. People look down upon us because of the way that we looked. And so that stuck to us when we heard that being used to label us over and over again. So I'm not going to talk a whole lot about that. I had a good childhood and I love to draw my entire life. I've just always drawn. So if I saw something, I always liked to draw it. If I watched a film, I wanted to draw it. If I saw something out on the street, I wanted to draw it. If my mom told me something, I wanted to draw it. So I was so visual my entire life. And in the deaf education program that my parents found for me and put me into was really difficult because they said we're immigrants. They assumed that my parents couldn't speak English. And they thought as an immigrant, that means you're going to have true language deprivation because you don't have English. You're not used to the American culture. And so they made me repeat kindergarten. My mom tried to say, no, she's learned all sorts of things at home. We're communicating fine. She should do fine in school. But they said, no, they wanted to slow down my progress and make me repeat kindergarten again. So I did take kindergarten for the second time. And then I lost trust in that program. And so they decided that they would go ahead and mainstream me instead of keeping me in the deaf program. So they started having sign language interpreters so that I could catch up with real education. And when we moved to that town, I'll never forget, I was the new kid coming into the school. And I remember a girl saying, "Where are you from?" And I explained, "Oh, we just moved here. We were from this town to now." And they said, "No, where are you from?" And I said, "Well, my family's from," and I gave a little bit of a description, but not real details, really. I mean, to me, I felt like it was none of their business. And they said, "Go back to your country." And I thought, well, I wasn't even sure how to say, but that was a horrible experience that I had in school. And then, in middle school, the teacher would have us sit around in the tables and talk about the US government and citizenship and all of that. And the teacher asked everyone, "Are you all born in the United States?" Everybody raised their hand except for me. I was the only one that wasn't born in the United States. So of course the entire class looked at me and they said, "Are you a US citizen?" And I thought, well, I never thought about that before. Nobody asked me that question. But my family explained that we had a green card. And so I said, well, yeah. And the teacher said, well, you're not a US citizen. And so that really threw me off. And then I started to analyze, I mean, you don't look at me as an American. So that really affected how I saw myself too. And that I always thought I was an American, but from then on, I realized I wasn't. If you're not born in the United States, you're not it, even though I've been here for this long. And so I guess I considered myself 50-50, half of Korea, half of American. So I had both cultures, but I wasn't sure where to fit in. So as a teen and everything, we moved to America. I started learning English. And so do you say 1.75? I guess that's where I fit out, the 1.75 generation. So 0 to 5 during that time when language was being developed and you were picking up language. I mean, I had already been using American Sign Language. I had already been using some English with my family. And so the 1.75 generation is where I feel like I fit in. And then when we started my new life with my family and everything, we went to a local church. We didn't have any family members around, so we joined the local church and they really helped us. It was a Korean Christian church. And in high school, my mom wrote a couple of things and I remember those to this day. And they said, the church said that you've become deaf because it's a punishment from God. And then the second phrase that was used was, you'll have a hard time finding playmates. So I asked Mom what those two mean. And at the church, one of the church members that Mom used to use to babysit for me, their daughter was the same age as I was. And so my mom would ask if she had to go to work, if the neighbor would mind watching. And so that mom did watch us, but then when my mom would go to work and then she'd come back home to pick me up afterwards, that mother said, "Oh, Youmee cannot come and see my daughter anymore." And my mom said, "But why? What's wrong?" And that woman had said, she's using sign language like that. And so my daughter started to copy that movement and they were just signing back and forth. And my mom said, "Well, What's the matter with that? And the other mother said, I don't want my daughter to become deaf like your daughter. My mother's feelings were so hurt, but we never used that woman again to babysit. So she would take me to work with her if she could, that kind of thing. I didn't even know those things happened. I didn't remember, but I feel bad that my mom experienced that. Another time I do remember, my family would go and visit Korea once in a while because my grandparents were still there. And sitting around the house, I had other cousins, younger cousins that were in elementary school. I was already in high school. I was older than them. And I would sit there, they would all be talking, and I couldn't get in there. My cousin would say, hey, why does Youmee not speak? Why she won't talk to me? And they said, Youmee doesn't know Korean language. That's why she doesn't speak. But they wouldn't tell them that I was deaf. And I thought that was interesting that my grandparents wouldn't just say that Youmee's deaf. My aunts and uncles wouldn't say that they have a deaf niece. I have a cousin that's fully deaf. My father's hard of hearing. They don't use sign language. They usually use the oral method, but I was surprised that my grandmother was embarrassed and didn't want to admit that I'm there. We have deafness throughout the history of the family, but they really hid it all the time. One other situation I remember, when I was meeting some deaf individuals and trying to learn from them, I remember the one time when parents would find out that their babies were deaf in Korea, they would be just devastated. But in America, they are often happy and they celebrate it. So to me, it started making me wonder, why can't we change things in my life? I want to go ahead and get rid of that negative stigma that was all around deafness and disability in the Asian organizations, or it happens in America too. But I tried to figure out how I could do that. And I decided that that could happen through my art. With my family as immigrants, they didn't move here for me to become an artist. They moved here so that I could have a better life and I could have a stable job and not to become a starving artist. So I struggled with that. And I thought, well, maybe I should become a teacher, but that didn't really fit. It wasn't right for me. I tried. I went through the motions, went through the school, but art just continued to call me over and over again. And I finally decided that I couldn't ignore that. And I would just do art on the side. I would continue to work, but then work on my art on the side. And then I just got burnt out with working, and I decided to go to New York City. My family was pretty shocked and devastated that I decided to go to New York City. And I started taking some art classes. And in those art classes, it was with Costa Vavagigas. And with that program, I was starting to learn all about art. Next slide, please. And while I was learning, they taught me so much and emphasized that drawing was so important. It's the foundation for every art. So this is a charcoal drawing that I had done. And that was in my visual arts school. I had so many wonderful, wonderful teachers that taught me throughout my education. They gave me a lot of advice, a lot of tips. One thing that I'll never forget was the print class for etching. Next slide. So I did learn from the other teacher in silk screen. So that could be printed on t-shirts and other things. And the teachers would use history within there. and show how that influenced the current. And he said a lot of that history came from China, and explained that the Asian companies being printed, they were always referred to China. And so I started to look, and I realized that we have a rich history in Asia. And I don't know why that disappeared. Where did it go? What happened to it? So that class was my chapter in New York City, and that ended it and my time there, because what happened was a hearing classmate came up to me and said, that was an international student from Korea, and said, I'm a Korean American, so I was wondering what you learned beforehand. And so we talked about that printing, art, and everything, and how it began here. So the teacher oversaw our conversation and then went in and told the other people about the fact that printing actually started in Asia, even though they were teaching that it started here in America. And so I decided to go ahead. I was a little bit awkward when I went to the Korea. They were all hearing. I had an assistant with me, and they were younger. And I brought some of my artwork with me to show them what I could do, and said that I wanted to continue to work with you. And the instructor said, well, you're deaf, okay. So we would continue to work on my art, and they noticed what I was drawing and the fact that I included more things that they were teaching me.
So as the instructor was going through this is some of the hands-on work that was done with the assistant. You can see the two pictures side by side. One is on a table. It looks like a whiteboard. The second one is an image on a copper palette that we were refining. And that was in 2017 when I went to Korea, and I was just eager to learn more, but I was disappointed at that time because this craft was fading away and going more to the Western countries. And, I would go when I was younger, my mom and I would go to the local markets, and I remember seeing them, but I did not see them in Korea. I did see a lot of the fabric clothing that was for sale, various colors. And one of them was all white. And I was asking what that fabric meant. And they said that it was meant for funerals, which was unusual for me. And usually people would be wearing white for moments of mourning, completely different than what you would see within Western culture, where people are wearing complete black. So that was something new to me. Between various Asian cultures, whether it be Korea, Japan, or Chinese, you often would wear white. And realizing that each color had a significant cultural meaning, and bringing it back to 2017, I was a little disappointed in that. So I went along and continued my journey in art. And, I wanted to know a little bit more about this craft. And so I was able to pick up any one of the paper materials, and I found out that it's called Hanji, which is a Korean paper for art. And I wanted to learn more about this because I was realizing that art was dying away, and I was reading books. I was trying to study all I could about this Korean skill. I remember reading about it when I was a kid, and I was somewhat familiar with it. And so here's a little bit more on the next slide. This is the second one. So the first one has a panel. It's on white paper, which looks like a bookmark of sort. There's a tiger on one side and some mountains on the other. And this was printed on Khajii. And the second one is a combination of sun and moon with birds in the background and mountains on the foreground. And that is about a Korean folklore I remember as a kid, between the sun and the moon being brothers and sisters. And my time was running out where I would need to go back to the States, and I wanted to see more deaf art. And I realized I wanted to figure out how I could support deaf Korean artists, but there was very little out there, not much support for them. So I was obviously intrigued by that. Next slide, please. So there was a paper, remember the paper Khajii? I remember this film, this woman, she's a Korean American who went to Korea to study how to make Khajii paper, because she felt that, again, this craft was dying away. So she went to Korea to learn about this, to then take this trade and bring it to America. And I will never forget this film. It was, I suggest everybody watch this. And, there's no workshop, unfortunately, for the deaf to be available. And this takes weeks to make. I'll never forget the first time I met her. She's hearing. And I was telling her that I wanted to meet her and that she is a hearing Korean American willing to make this craft. We corresponded via email, and I saw that there was an interpreter showed up. It wasn't for me, but I wanted to see more of this. There was a Zoom webinar and I was just very intrigued by it. And there is just so much paper that was made, and I was just amazed at how much was produced. I then later went to Amsterdam. And next slide, please. So I continued my print work and showing that. Once I left Amsterdam, then I went to I was very interested in Japanese woodblock work, and there was a strong influence within the 1800s. And so far, not much of this is done today. This is from Van Gogh Impressionism, and many of the individuals from Japan took his influence, and I did not realize how much of an influence he had on Japanese art. So again, I am getting my master's degree in film and animation. And at that time, the pandemic hit, which put a wrinkle in my graduate program, unfortunately. And again, year 2020 is here, and I found that I was accepted into the deaf art program. The coordinator did let me know that it needed to be postponed for 1 year, which I had to accept. Struggling through, just kept going. It was tough. And then fall of 2020, I found out that I could get into some elective courses. I had some choices, but they were very limited. And the ones I wanted were not available until one, because again, the pandemic didn't allow for a lot of options. It was very competitive trying to find a seat within graduate school. And I was finally able to get into ceramics. So I just fell in love. But again, I still had animation on my mind. And the teacher and I were trying to coordinate everything. And he asked me why I wanted to do this, what my major was. And I had told him that it was in animation, and, pleasantries were made, but I was trying to clarify that I did not want to major in ceramics. My heart was still in animation. And this person was Kokoda. And so we were looking at the equipment, and he showed me the room. There were different pieces of equipment out there. And I did see, the old time animation machines there. It wasn't on a screen. It didn't work that way. And so I thought that's what I want to do rather than ceramics. And this is what I'm talking about. This is what the Zoetrope looks like. Zoetrope. So as you can see, the zoetrope is moving, which is causing the animation to happen. But I never connected that to deaf art until 2021. Next slide. So finally, we're in 2021, and the house that's depicted is where the deaf artist would stay. This was our dorm, if you will, and it even had a kitchen inside. But I do want to let you know there will be a deaf panel this Thursday. So hopefully you'll be able to make the Thursday showing, and one of these 5 will be there to discuss more. So imagine that in person after 1 year of isolation, we finally are able to be in person and hug each other and be around each other. We did this for a solid month, the 5 of us. One of them is deafblind, a deafblind writer, Christina Hartman, and we became very close. We started to get each other. We both were immigrants. Our families immigrated here. We also grew up mainstream. So I asked Christina about my art and how to make it more visual. And, she talked a little bit about it, but it wasn't that impressionable for her. And so Christina, we went into her studio, and there were 2 big pieces of artwork there. And they were very tactile focused. They had a lot of texture, something for individuals to feel. And again, this was within Cynthia Wetzel's studio. And this way, deafblind can feel what's going on and see the art. And I wanted to know if I could purchase a piece of hers to kind of play with it. And she was willing to help me get this going and get my artwork going. Next slide, please. And so y'all are probably trying to figure out how this applies to animation. So the 5 of us girls were trying to figure out our favorite sign and put that in film. And so we formatted that to put onto the computer and made some adjustments. We were able to edit it and make the pages formatted. We used these tiles and added faces to it, faces to the tiles. And I asked Christina to join me in the studio to see if she understood what the art was. Christina was able to immediately feel the artwork. She was able to feel the tiles. She could feel the hand shapes. She could kind of how that zoetrope reaction is. She was able to get a sense of the animation when she was sitting down feeling the tiles. So the 2 of us, Christine and I, were thinking about it, how we're not just limited to one dimension. And we started talking, we started playing with it. And really, you can use anything as your medium. It's just really a matter of perspective. So next slide, please. And I'll show you the animation video. Next slide. There you go. Can you play it? Cool. So the deaf art residents were able to experience this. So how does that impact today? So with my book cover, as an Asian American, one of the biggest frustrations I've experienced is when people think that we are all the same, that all Asians are the same, that you came from Japan, you came from Korea, you came from China, therefore you're all the same, and which is not true. That to me is a metador. And I have this brailled in a on a tile to remind me that we are not all monotone. Next slide, please. So when I first started becoming an artist in New York City, I just was hitting roadblock after roadblock. Nothing was working. I just feel like I kept stumbling until I came upon this book, Steal Like an Artist. I started reading this and I was very hopeful, hoping that I would become an artist and be done with it. But as you start to read this book, yes, you can be an artist, but it also tells you to keep your day job, which was baffling to me. You know, I wanted to be an artist. I didn't want to keep my 9 to 5. So I did as the book said, and I kept working my 9 to 5 until I felt that it was time that I could start shifting more of my focus on my art and be more freelance focused. Because I didn't want to just do art on the side. I made sure that there was a schedule and that I was able to still keep the art going. And as I approached to be more freelance, I learned some hard lessons at that time, especially in the beginning. Some very important lessons that I learned from this were, next slide, please. This, don't lowball the artist, which simply means try not to ask to do work for free, or don't accept the minimum payments. Don't just be satisfied with what's being given. You know, yes, it takes time, it takes energy, it takes experience and skill. So for me to be willing to put forth something at cost is going to take a lot of time. And that's something that I learned hard. You know, try to figure out how to price yourself. And I had to talk to a lot of people within the area, you know, with various levels of expertise. Know your own value is key. This too is something I made a lot of mistakes on. You know, I would sign contracts with certain expectations and make sure that you both agree on those expectations. Otherwise, communication can go awry. Next. This too, be on time. When a client or an organization wants you to finish a project at a certain time, make sure it's finished at that time. You know, make sure that the communication is clear and that you both know when the project needs to be completed. Let them know what your progress is and what they want as well. Next slide.
So build trust. That's really, really important. And what I mean by that is sometimes you might pitch an idea to a client and they might say, no, that's not what I want. So the more you work together, they're going to realize that relationship is built, and then they're going to follow my advice more and more in the future. In the beginning, you had to keep giving more and more information to build that trust with that client. And we also have to build trust with the deaf community and the art community. That's really important. Next slide. All right. This is such an important topic. As an artist, during a pandemic, you can't ignore what happened. You just can't. It affected my studies. My anxiety increased during the pandemic. I was shut out. There was a lot of violence against Asian people here in America. They blamed us for the disease and causing the pandemic. They blamed all of the Asian people that were here. They looked at me differently. They judged me, you know, because all Asians are the same. That's what they said. So there was more and more abuse. And so I couldn't ignore that. It was on my mind a lot. And so I started to realize, I was surprised once the pandemic happened, relationships were separated because I couldn't be around anyone. Next slide. This movie was released, Minari, and that film was basically my life story. It talked about what families experience when coming to America. It talked about a Korean family that moved to America to create a new life. That was my life. That was me. When I watched the film, I related to it so much. And I thought my family experienced that. That's exactly what we did. The Korean food we tried to hold on to. I'm telling you, it was just like an exact life. And it's different than that would have been a Chinese movie or a Japanese movie. This was from Korea. So that's why I think I related it so much. The director that made the movie was basing it on his true life growing up. And that movie was released here in America. and the director is an American, a Korean American, and based it on his life. And he made that film about his family and what they experienced. And I thought maybe I should do the same thing. Why not show my story, how I was raised growing up here in America, moving here from Korea. And I thought that I could show my life. And that will be released in 2022. So I think it's important to share our stories like this. So anyway, Minari had a lot of things that were very similar to me, but there were some other controversial things that came up. The movie was accepted as a foreign language film for the Golden Globe Awards. They would not include it in any other category. They had to keep it as a foreign language film. And I couldn't understand why that choice was made. That movie, from beginning to end, is American. It's all in America. You know, it was all Korean Americans living in America. Next slide. So they did talk about the people. They were complaining that that wasn't wrong. It wasn't okay. Next. Oops. So these were some of the comments on Twitter, Asian American people writing that. You can see the first one that said, I've never seen a more American film than Minori. You know, it talked about an immigrant family coming to America, chasing the American dream. You need to change that category. It's not a foreign film. But, you know, you think that it's only English. And then the second person said that Minori is an American film written and directed by an American filmmaker here in America, led by American actors here in America, 100%. So what could be more American than that? So I look back on my middle school experience and I remember when the teacher said, you're not an American. I remembered that. I looked back at that and thought, yes, something has to be done. We have to change that. So next slide. So again, that's why I wrote this. Again, we're not a monolith. Asian Americans, I mean, they always look at us and say, we're all the same. We're all the same. You're all the same, you know? So I have to remind them that we're Asian, but we're all different. So here's the countries. You can see all of the different countries that make up Asia, all of those countries. They have different languages, different cultures, different beliefs, different religions. I mean, that's all of them. And so this map shows Turkey, the Pacific Ocean. So you see all of those different countries that are included in Asia. Next. So another topic that I could not ignore is Asia's contribution to the arts. Remember, I talked about learning so much about printmaking from Asia and from that history. And there was a lot of ceramics that were happening. The skills, the technology, the methods that were being used were being passed on. It was all within the art community. And it seems to be disappearing here in America. So one of the things I felt like just this past spring, I watched a documentary for one of my class. And in watching that, they talked about typesetting, you know, printing and how the printing press was used. And they all came back to the American inventor. They just continued to say the American inventor that had done this. And I kept thinking, look at all of the information that came from Asia. That information isn't correct. So they just continue to say over and over again that Johannes Gutenberg was the inventor. But it was in Korea long before it came here. So in China, this was the information that was created. They used wood and lettering. That's how they printed books back in the day. And you can see that 1377, 593 AD. And in Korea, they created the metal in 1234. And then they officially recognized Korean for having the oldest book used from the metal printing in 1377. That was the oldest book that they found from the metal typesetting. And yet Johannes Gutenberg was getting all that information, and it was 200 years later, and saying that he created it all. So about 1200, that's when all of the information got disappeared from the Asian, everything that they created. They started focusing on silk more and more, but you can see how everything influenced each other and then eventually got to Europe. But in the 1200s, do you know what was happening at that time? The Genghis Khan, you know, the famous dictator that came over and took over Asia. And they started to take away art and hide it, and decided that it wasn't important, and brought it to other people in Europe and Germany. But Johannes did not invent that all along. He really hadn't.
A lot has been missing throughout the art, through the press, making of print and theater, you name it, ceramics, everything that's been created by that. So hopefully you'll start to recognize how we can educate ourselves more and work better as various organizations, and how it can impact our lives as a whole. Next. So now I want to talk about the Asian deaf artists within the past. So one fight that we're going through is trying to stop the discrimination between deaf and calling us disabled. You know, it's okay if there's disabilities, it's okay if there's struggles and everything, but to be oppressed is not okay. There's no good reason for that. So I was doing some research trying to figure out deaf Asian artists, and not to my surprise, there's very little out there. I believe I found one. Kathleen Bockway was explaining, she was explaining how this artist is pretty cool. Gasukama Seo was a painter during the 1600s and was officially recognized at that time. And again, this was within the 1600s. This person was deaf, and there's documentation about him being a painter and being deaf. Again, he was a Chinese painter or Japanese painter, excuse me. And a lot of people were recognizing him. A lot of royals were recognizing him. Unfortunately, during World War II, his work was destroyed and only this piece was left. And some of the characters were lost as well. And so again, this was his one piece that has been saved, and it's now sitting in a museum in Japan. Next. The other one, I remember going into Korean Agency for the Deaf, and I wanted to know who this person was. Kim is the last name, and in Asian culture, typically we put the last name first and the first name second, opposite from American culture. So we introduce a surname first before the first name. And sometimes that confuses a lot of people, especially looking online. If you're looking for Kim as a first name, technically speaking, it is a surname. So back to this, in 1914 to 2001, I saw this picture of a girl on two girls on a seesaw. And it's a familiar painting to me. You know, it was during a festival, a holiday festival. And this will always be in my mind. The next one is of a tiger. You know, tigers used to live in Korea just roaming around, but that's not standard practice anymore. So that's just some knowledge out there for you. And so next slide, please. I only came across two, at least two for now. And slowly that's changing, I'm noticing, which means that the list is going to be endless for Asian deaf artists out there. I'm sure there'll be more later to come. Next slide, please. Many of you know who she is, but I do want to explain a little bit of my experience with her. So going back 10 years ago, I just started developing as a sound artist for deaf artists. And I went to her workshop and I was just playing around with the sound and trying to figure out her art medium with this sound. I love her films. If you haven't watched it yet, I strongly suggest it. It's a TED Talk. It's the music of sign language. I again recommend it. So maybe some of you have known her. And next slide, please. This is another artist that I remember walking in just a few years ago in Washington, D.C. And I was at a signing Starbucks, and I was looking at this mural and looking at all the colors, and I found out who the artist was. And I met with her. She's Chinese, and started to explain it to me that all these colors have a significance to them. And there's an article about her as well. Next slide, please. So Zeneb Khajii is an Iranian artist, Iranian American, and I met her and I saw this painting and wanted to know about her experience and the meaning behind it. And with Iranian work, she was working on Persian art as well and working on these tablets. So that's a little bit about her. Next. He's an emerging artist and just trying to make him more aware to people. He is deaf and blind, and he can do his art himself. He is deaf and blind. He uses a computer to enhance his vision if needed. And again, this is some of his artwork. I was talking with his sister and explained the process on how he's able to create this artwork. He blows it up on screen and works on the fine details while he's producing it. So David Dewan Chow is an Asian American deaf artist, and I'm just trying to spread the word about him. And again, you can see his handle right there for more information. Next slide. There is a website, deafart.org, where you can see all the artists out there, as well as at Asian signers, and just trying to help them get established and get their name out there and have their spotlight as deaf artists. And we try to do this every year. So there should be a blog on Facebook, Instagram, and on Twitter at Asian Signers. We also have the panelists soon. So next slide. Next slide. So we will have the Asian Artist webinar. So save the date for September 25th. And there'll be more information in the chat. So hopefully I'll see you there at the webinar, and we'll have more chances to talk about deaf Asian artists. And so hopefully I'll see you there. Next slide. My future projects. I have a few things that I've been thinking about. First thing I want to focus on is my thesis on film as a deaf Korean American artist. And I want to also focus on the deaf AAPI, Asian American Pacific Islander, AAPI, and bring in some of their stories. Meaning that I would hope to have a book that can be published for people to read, and something that people can glean on with various perspectives to educate everybody. And another project I'm thinking about is Deaf Asian Artist History. Again, I still want to dig deeper and find out more. I want to know more about Asian gifting within art as well. So thank you all, and thank you for joining this presentation. Thank you.
So this is Tony. Now it's going to be time for a question and answer. I do want to let you know that there's been many comments happening during your presentation. You can read those later on, okay? Let's see. So as an Asian artist, you've seen examples of Asian art being recognized in the general community, not just in the deaf community, but is it recognized in general?
Yes, but right now there is change. So right now it's spreading within the community, but it still needs some improvement.
I agree with you. Let me see. Somebody asked where they could actually see that movie.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Minari.
I believe it's available on Amazon. Yeah, if you have Prime, you can watch it through there. I'm sure it's available in other platforms as well.
Okay, and then somebody said that you could actually watch it on Google Play Redbox,
Yes.
Direct TV, and the library. You can borrow the DVD from the library.
Okay.
Okay, so in the RDS members, there's a couple people were wondering how we can support more AAPI artists and more people like you.
So if you find opportunities, if you find pieces to be displayed, the AAPI has public showings that can be shared.
Okay. And then, I don't know, I'll go ahead and ask it anyway. Somebody asked if a child's mother that said that they didn't want you to be around her daughter, did you ever run into them again at any time in life? And if so, what was the reaction?
We lost contact.
So just
Yeah, I
never
don't
saw
know.
them again, just moved on, right?
Yeah, that was so long ago, about 30 years ago. I don't even remember, but yeah.
Okay. And then some people are interested in purchasing some of your artwork. They're wondering where they can purchase it.
So right now I'm in graduate school and I'm putting a hold on anything to be sold. Once I'm done with graduate school, hopefully I'll have more artwork for sale and make that available. But graduate school is taking up most of my time. And so keep an eye out within the next year.
All right, hurry up and graduate.
Yes.
Okay, then
Oh, yes, I will. I will share that link, of course. I do see
okay.
that comment.
Good.
So that link, it was posted for events for Asian signing panel and for more deaf artists to be involved. So I'm no longer involved with them, though. Yes,
Would
definitely.
I be able to attend and participate?
Yes, please.
Okay.
I don't know if you would be on the panel, but yes, you can watch.
Okay. Let's see. Somebody asked a personal question about their residency, like the 2 generations and the 1.25 and the 1.75 and what do you call the white, well, almost like an outsider? Is that what you would call them, kind of? Or from the, what do you call that?
So if you're born in the US, you're American. There's no immigration to you. You're white, but if you have children, you could count it as your parents immigrated and you're second generation. That would count. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know. Interesting question.
So what would you call their children? Second generation?
Second generation, depending.
Half or?
Yeah, because if one parent immigrated, that would be second generation, but that kid could be considered biracial, bicultural.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, that's definitely mine for sure.
Have another Zoom class for sure. That'd be great. So then,
So all my information is there. That's pretty easy.
I think she shared it with the host and panelist. We need to change it
Oh, oops.
to everyone, but so this presentation is being recorded and we will be uploading it on our website, the DVAF website. So you can get more information from there. If you missed anything, you can watch it again.
So it looks like there's one more question out there. One more in the chat.
Did you want to? Oh, you want me to? Okay. What advice would you give to all young artists about how to make their art more inclusive?
So really meeting with different possibilities, meeting with them and trying to think about what the art means to the people. You know, asking people who have different abilities, different experiences, just ask questions, you know, and see if it works. See what works and what doesn't work.
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay. You mentioned falling in love working with clay ceramics. So what caused you to fall in love with ceramics like that compared to the other mediums?
So I love how it's 3D, how you can mold it. With paint, it's two-dimensional.
Mhm.
With ceramics, you're using all three dimensions. You're using touch, you're physically molding something from the clay, you're bringing it to life. And there's more forms that it can be made into versus painting. You just look at a flat piece, it's pretty, it's there. But when you see something in its full dimension, there's more meaning behind it.
I agree. I love ceramics too, but resources aren't available to me.
This is true.
And so, I don't have all of the materials. I don't have a kiln in my house to burn it. What were you going to say?
So that is a struggle that deaf artists have, is they have their limitations. It is important to get that kiln. So yeah, that's true. It's hard to get into. You know,
Yeah,
some
I need to
community
find
centers do have them. Some, yeah, again, some community centers have kilns available for use.
Yeah, I bet the
But
community college might too.
yeah, there's different centers that have kilns available.
Okay, sure.
So there's options out there.
Um, but one of the negatives is they can make the same thing over and over again. I like the uniqueness,
But
and
you can use a
but if you
cast. Make a
oh, I
cast.
guess, yeah, they never turn out the same.
Just use the
I see.
mold.
Okay. So who is your role model?
Oh, when I was growing up, Asian Americans a long time ago, they didn't have a lot of role models, you know, especially when I was a kid. And as I started growing up, I still had a hard time finding somebody to identify with until I was in college. And I met one, but well, there's an actors I look up to, like Sandra Oh. She's a Korean actress, Canadian. Sandra Oh. Yeah, different actresses.
Okay. Who is your favorite artist, or who influenced your work the most, your
Okay.
style?
Right now, so going back, I remember uh, a European artist, you know, of various detail. I remember seeing a poster of them and Van Gogh as well. I remember being inspired by some of his work. James Jan. At that time, James Jean, I should say, Asian American artists were very famous as well. Okay.
Yeah, some people knew Klimt. Okay, let's see. So I think we'll go ahead and close the session.
Thank you,
You
everyone.
did
Thank you. You
such
had
a
great
wonderful
questions.
job, Youmee. Thank you so much. What a
Thank you.
great job. I think everyone enjoyed it. Lots of positive comments, some great questions, some great feedback, and everybody would add on to those comments. So it was such an awesome experience for all of us tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you all for joining us. And thank you, Youmee, for joining the Deaf Ink Visual Arts Festival.
Thank you, Tony, for coordinating this as well, and for the captions, and for putting on this event.
Ah, you stole my words, Youmee, but that's okay. Yes, I second what Youmee said. As for the audience, thank you so much. Feel free to look at our website to see the future workshops and webinars that are happening. This Thursday is the Deaf Artist Residency Program. Yes. And that's where Youmee had mentioned she was part of that project, and other artists will be members of the panel. One can't show up, but I think we have 4 members that will be there. And that's going to be led by Youmee Metzel. The interpreter mispronounced that, sorry. So take a look at the flyer to see more information. It's a wonderful program for a Thursday. So join us then.
Thank you.
Thank you all, everyone. Have a good night.